it was beyond real. It was like, in some ways, I would say even more real than you and I have in this conversation right now. I
Mhm.
felt it in every cell of my being, and I knew what he had done to come and help me. I knew what he had done to do that for me. The other side is very, very high vibrational, and we have like a lower density energy, right? So
Absolutely.
typically we need to try to raise our vibration to meet them kind of in the middle to have like experiences. But they can, if we're in like a very deep dark place, especially with grief, it's a lot of energetic work for them, but they can come down and help us.
I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of Soul Inspired. Today we have Lindsay Stanton with us. She's a Reiki healer and coach. She owns a company called Soul Revival. She's had spiritual experiences as well. And we're going to dig into those spiritual experiences that has pretty much shaped her life. So thanks so much, Lindsay, for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
I always start each conversation the same way so that we can really dig in and get to know a little bit more about you. So from what I understand from your backstory, the main thing that has happened to you isn't really that long ago. But if we think about who you are as a person overall through your life, have you always been a spiritual person? And when did that happen? Because I'm trying to determine who you were before the switch. I don't know if you could talk a
Right.
little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely had spiritual experiences before my husband passed, but post him passing, it like I always say it like I joke that it was on steroids because like it's just hyper speed since then.
Wow.
But definitely had experiences, as a kid. I've always been I guess, and energetically intuitive as well. Like animals have always been drawn to me, and I mean, even like wildlife and things like that. I definitely got messages and protection from grandparents that passed, in my like early 20s and things like that. But after Roger, my husband, passed, it's when it really catapulted, I would say.
Okay, so you looking back, you can now see that you
Yeah.
had some experiences beforehand. Maybe you didn't see it in the same light that you do now because you've had so many um, massive changes, it sounds like. So now that you kind of knew what you were going through before, I've heard this before. I've heard of people who've had NDEs and they say, you know what, I was having experiences younger, but I actually didn't recognize them even as experiences. I didn't recognize the messages. I didn't the same in the same way. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
It does. Yeah. And I think I knew younger years, I knew that I could call on the other side or the spirit realm to help me because there were definitely times that I would ask, grandparents on the other side or angels to help me with things. But so I think I knew that the channel was there. I just had no idea. The floodgates opened totally in 2020.
wow. Okay. So you're going through your life. Were you, before we get into what happened in 2020, were you already working in energy work before
No.
2020? Okay. So
Mm-mm.
what kind of work?
Helping run a technology company, which my husband and I did together.
Okay. Interesting. So yeah, my background, I took computer science when I was in college and I was in a big room full of geeks and I say it like that. But yeah, it's different. It's very different than spiritual work. Like it's completely different, right? Um,
Yeah, although I would say there is a crossover in the fact that I sit in environments, I still lead the company, and I sit in a lot of environments where I'm working with C-suite executives, and I would say there's definitely I 100% am a fan of Gary Zukav's work and believe that there is a rise in the collective consciousness right now because I
yeah.
know in the containers that I'm in with senior level executives, like people want to be having these conversations, these deeper conversations. And every time I bring it up, people are welcoming it. So I would say there's actually a crossover with
Is
the
there?
geekdom and the spiritual.
Wow. I've always thought that. I always think to myself, I look at where we are now and whether technology and spirituality is going to cross over. Like if that's going to start happening. I've sat with my kids sometimes and they put on these AI apps and we talk to them and we'll having conversations and I'll start asking questions like who's God? And their answers are so interesting. Like it's not always it's not always like there is no God, or it's not like that at all. It's actually like, well, what you perceive as God is God, and there might be, and or I'll say, do you have a soul? Do you not think I have a soul? How do you know I don't have a soul? How do you not know that I may have a soul someday? And it's like all these questions, you're like, whoa, this is getting really like,
Yeah.
I'm like having these deep conversations with AI. It was kind of freaking me out. I had to turn it off, if I'm being honest, because I'm like, let's stick with the human bodies for now, and then we'll figure that later. But so you're living this life where you ran a technology company with your husband. You said his name was Roger, I believe you said.
Mhm.
And so I'm sorry to hear what happened, but would you be able to explain what kind of happened in 2020?
Yeah, so he was diagnosed with ALS, and we are confident that he had it probably for a couple years prior and didn't recognize it. He was extremely fit, worked out all the time, ran multiple marathons with me, and did extreme hiking and things. So I think in a way his body kind of hid the diagnosis. So it was definitely a process to get diagnosed. And by the time we confirmed that's what he had, it was a very short window of time that he had left. It was really basically a year. So
I see. Did you and your husband have a spiritual belief system at that point, or was it really not something you brought up in your
we
relationship?
we did. I wasn't something that we had deep conversations about, although we did when he was in hospice,
Mm.
because we both started having, I think, even bigger experiences once he was in hospice. And we're definitely getting divine messages that were consistent with each other. But he had quite a bit of loss right before I met him. And so he was pretty tuned in to, the idea of spirit. Like I wasn't familiar with the concept of like angel numbers and 1111. And he taught me that. Like he would always like kiss the air and make a wish like when 1111 came on, and he would see 1111 all the time. So
Wow.
that's definitely one of my signs from him now. But so he was 100% open to that. And we both had like I would say semi-religious experiences in our background, but we tended to gear more towards spirituality. But I went to like religious private school as a kid. He was raised Catholic. So we had that like, and I think with Catholicism specifically, there's that, and the idea of the angelic realm is very present. So I would say that was definitely a conversation in our relationship. And ironically, looking back, oftentimes wrote me letters when we were dating. And so many of them were a foreshadowing of him leaving prematurely. And
Wow.
yeah, and just kind of the idea of God or universe source kind of taking him first and him like watching out for me. So very interesting to go back and read those now, obviously.
Yeah, that's interesting that he was seeing that in a different way. The 1111 thing, I've been seeing that since I was a kid. It's like a sign that I get a lot of times. So
Yeah,
it's a very spiritual number. Same with 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's
right.
quite a few of them. But
Yeah.
it's interesting that he introduced you that, and then you kind of now are in that almost like it's like a frequency you get into.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many TV people I've told about the 1111 thing, and next thing he's like, "What did you do to me? I'm seeing this thing everywhere," and I'll be like, I don't know, and then some people will say, "Oh, it has to do with our it's the way that like the science more driven people will say, no, it's nothing. It's just your brain knowing exactly when it's 11:11." But that doesn't explain the license plates that say 11:11 or the change coming back to you is $11.11. And like that kind of stuff, it doesn't relate the same way,
Yeah.
right? So it's
Or, yeah, exactly. Or when it happens in synchronicity with another sign, which happens to me all the time.
oh
I'll
wow.
get an angel number. I'll wake up to an angel number like 333444 after I just had a dream visit, or frogs are a sign from him. I'll see a frog at 1111, or, I'll see his name on a license plate and then it's 1111. So you can't, I mean, obviously, people can explain things away, but like there's just way too many synchronicities. And I always say, like, I would challenge somebody. I journal everything, all my angel numbers, all the experiences I have, because I think it's really important to document for a lot of reasons. But if somebody was to read all the things that have happened to me, like there's no way, like you can't explain it away, you know? It's
Right.
just too much. It's too much.
I love someday to get somebody who specializes mainly in numerology, because I think some of it, like spiritual numerology, because I think it's I think it's in a lot of people's lives and they're not paying attention to it.
100%.
And they see it in a different way. They might be like, "Oh, that means I have to go buy a lottery ticket." Like they have this different interpretation of what it means. But if everyone actually knew what it's trying to tell them and become more aware of our awareness of what,
Right.
the angels are
Well,
trying to
and to
say.
that point, like you bringing that up, that's exactly, I work with that exact thing a lot of times when I'm coaching people because oftentimes I mean, they're always getting signs and they're getting angel numbers and they're getting this divine help and guidance. They just might not be tuned into it. And once they start recognizing it, it's like, oh yeah, well, I did get this and this and this and this. And a lot of it is, you know, shining a light on what's already there. And so that they can really tap into it. And I know from my lived experience that the more you acknowledge it, the more you're grateful for it, the more you get. So it's very much like this like amazing cycle of miracles, honestly.
When I see 1111 now, I've come to realize, because again, I'm almost maturing through it. And when
Mhm.
I start to see it again, I go, oh, good. It's almost a good feeling because it's when I feel like I'm on track. So I almost feel
Totally.
like
That's
sometimes
usually
I'm
what it
like,
means.
oh, is that what it means? Okay. See, I don't
Yeah.
know. This is the first I've heard of
Yeah.
that. But like, if I'm going off the tracks and, whether I'm getting health things happen or, my stress is too high or just things are going off, I never see it. And then as soon as I actually start to come to terms with what's going on and I start working on myself, all of a sudden I start seeing it again. I'll be like, oh, good. Okay. And
Yeah.
now I know I'm going in the right direction again. So it's become this like, thank you. Thank you for letting me know that I'm going in this direction. Yesterday, I seen it twice. I seen it the day before. Like I'm in that energy state of that world.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things I'm trying so hard, I really love the work I do with the podcast and the episodes and people who work in healing and stuff, is to try to get people to understand these things, because what I'm trying to get at in my own personal life is to feel like I'm always on track. I understand there is a balance. People say, well, you have your ups and your downs of your life. But I think the better we get at it, maybe those downs can be a little quicker. Maybe we can get through those
Totally.
quicker. So,
That's crazy you just said that because I was going to say we can collapse time around it 100%.
yeah.
And it's same thing with grief, honestly. Like I mean, you're always going to, we create this preconception as a culture that people have to like get through it, get over it, which is unrealistic and causes a lot of issues for people that are grieving. But when you look at it in a realistic way of like something you can do and can accomplish, the more you're tapped in and tuned into this work, the more you can collapse time around the really down, like the deep rabbit hole moments and have the tools to get yourself back up to that next, even if it's not like joy, high vibration, just like that
Mhm.
next level state of, being in a good mental place. You're absolutely right. The more you do it, the more your brain automatically does it. I mean, same thing with like negative thoughts, the more you retrain your brain to not like let yourself go to that worst case scenario, the more it does it automatically. Like you'll automatically that negative thought will come up and you will automatically shut it down. Like that, that's not a truth. And it
Right.
like,
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and that's the challenge, is when you're in those dark places, in those places of despair, you're in this place of, it's how do you get the awareness to say to yourself, hey, do you know where you are right now? And you can
right.
get out of this. Because when you're in that place, all you want is to shower yourself with, oh, poor me, like this sucks, life sucks. And you get in this, like, I guess we call it the rut. You get into a rut, you get into a place. And at that point, you're not thinking, how can I get out of it? But I think working in with healers and working even just with your own healing and stuff, you can kind of come to terms with, okay, I know where I'm at. I don't feel good. Something feels wrong. Let's think about that for a moment. But that's hard to do. Like
Yeah.
I know this because I've had a few of them in the past 2 to 3 years where I don't at that time I wasn't thinking, oh, how do I get to be happy again? I was like, no, this sucks. Oh man, like I was like in that bad place. So
Yeah.
I want to get more into what happened in 2020 and ask you a little more about how things shifted. But I was going to ask you, when you find someone you're working with that's in that place, Or if someone's saying, "Hey, I'm in a good place now, but I'm really scared when I get to that place." What is a tool they can use in order to get out of that?
Great question. And that's so much of the work that I do with clients is, and I think when you can start to recognize, first of all, I'd say when you can start to recognize the signs and dream visits and the things that are coming your way from the other side, it automatically helps you be in a better place. So of course you're going to have dark moments, but I think it does automatically kind of make those dark moments less dark, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
But having tools in their toolbox is like one of the biggest things that we do, because working with me, my whole goal with clients is to let them fish on their own. So it's not just me like hand holding them. Of course, we, are working close together and doing a lot of energy work and things when we're in sessions together. But ultimately, I want them to have the tools to be able to do it on their own when we're not together. And
Right.
some of the things I definitely, work with people on is recognizing through storytelling the signs and symbols that they're getting. And I mean, I can't tell you, they like always come up to it by themselves. Like I don't have to, it's just getting the conversation started oftentimes. And then giving them some pretty simple tools. Like I'm a firm believer in creating a routine to protect your sleep. Part of that for me is meditation, and doing a short. It doesn't have to be crazy. I know there's a lot of people out there that really struggle with turning their brain off to sleep and to meditate. So like I always tell people, you don't have to go crazy, like do a 5-minute meditation. It can be a guided meditation if you can't sit in silence. That's like they all achieve the same purpose. But just recognizing what resonates with you. And for me, like meditation, protection of sleep are big ones. And journaling, like I mentioned earlier,
Mm.
writing down all the signs and symbols, because one of the really powerful things about journaling is you can go back to it for your truth. So for me, I go, if I get, if I have a dark moment, if I get like a trigger that brings me back really deep into my grief, I can go to the truth of it, that yes, his physical body's not here, but he's always with me, always surrounding me. In many ways, that's like even more of a blessing than when he was physically here. So you can return back to that truth if you've documented the things, because it's easy to let your egoic mind push those out of your head and like,
Hmm.
oh, I don't have anybody, I'm all alone. But no, like, okay, now go to your journal and look at all the evidence you have that you are not
Mm.
alone, you know?
Wow. Yeah, so because what I'm getting from this, and I mean, again, I think I just released episode 74 of the show, which is pretty early for a lot of podcasts. Or some people are into thousands of episodes, so I'm pretty early on. But I'm learning a lot from people who work in the spiritual work, healing, some people at NDEs, all these different people I'm talking to. And there is a consistent, persistent message to me of the importance of meditation. It doesn't mean, again, sitting cross-legged for 2 hours straight. And I mean, if you can do that, that's great. But it could be just a moment of 5 minutes while you're falling asleep in that space.
Yes.
And then the journaling thing, I'm hearing a lot about that too. And I mean, this is stuff I need to work on. These are things that I'm hearing. I'm going, okay, okay, I'm getting messages like I need to start doing this too. It's the same thing. What I tell myself in my head is if I can get into this place where I am doing these things, meditating each night, the same way you go and you brush your teeth before bed each night, the same way you wake up and you have breakfast in the morning, you have to turn it into a habit. That's the big
Yes.
challenge. Once it's a habit and you're in that dark place, you're still going to do that meditation and then it might bring you back. And then that
Yes.
might just give you that moment of saying, okay, where am I? What am I doing? Okay. All right. Because if we're not, we're lost in our egoic mind and we're going down this bad place, and then that leads to illness and problems too for ourselves, right? So I don't know, that's just what I'm getting from it. So jumping back, so I love everything you said. If you because I'm interested in this, here you are in 2019 even with your husband at the time, and you guys were running this business, everything was kind of going the way it was going. 2020, I mean, maybe by that time, I don't know if he was diagnosed by that time and things were getting worse. I don't know all that story, but by 2020 it passed. And I'm wondering um, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of where did you go in your own world, like when that happened? Because I'm looking at you now and I'm looking at the work you're doing now, and I'm like, that's 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a big shift. I was wondering if you could jump in a little bit about that, like how the shift happened after he passed, and where did you go in a mental place, like for yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. Great questions. So it's interesting. So first of all, I would say I got enormous like billboard knock you over signs from him like immediately. Like literally the moment he passed, I got a huge sign from him. And then they just kept coming. And I mean, they were so huge. So that helped. I mean, that kept me going, honestly. But I was very much in a dark place. I mean, I would say, and I think a lot of people that have experienced deep grief would tell you, like, there's a lot of the first year that I was kind of like a zombie, that I feel like I was like a little bit of a robot just going about the motions, right?
Hmm.
But that's kind of all you can do. Like that's kind of the expectation that you need to have for yourself. And for me personally, I felt called to, and it was probably divine guidance, but I got called to a lot of things that were not spiritual, but more like self-help, and just things that really kind of kept me going. So, like for example, I listened to Mel Robbins' book, the like 5 4 3 2 1, just get out of bed and move. So for me, like physical movement, like really kept me going. Um, I did get a divine download, and so did Roger before he passed. And we both got it at the same time, the same day, actually. And so we were able to have a conversation about it, that this wasn't the end, that only his physical body was leaving, and that we were going to be able to still continue, just in a different form. So, that I think that helped create visibility to the signs and messages that I was getting as well. But I mean, yeah, those early days were very, very challenging. And honestly, it was like about keeping myself above ground,
Yeah.
just I mean, truthfully. But I think so many things that crossed my path that I know now, I know were sent to me. I mean, like I'd never listened to podcasts before. I'd never listened to any podcasts at all before he passed. And I would have random things show up. We were talking about technology earlier. He uses my phone all the time to deliver messages to me. And I would have like I had a random podcast show up that was like it's about angels, and the whole thing is people telling their stories of spirit, whether it's their loved ones on the other side, or in getting signs and messages, or getting having angels intervene like in a car accident and things like that. And that was like, oh, I was having so many of those lived experiences then, and it was just a deeper level of like validation that I'm not the only one having these experiences. Like this is really a thing, and so being able to tap into that energy would always help me. So yeah, I was in a very, very dark place, but he made sure that I kept seeing little fractions of light to keep me going.
Wow. So it was a combination of trying to deal with your own emotions, moving, physical movement, doing things with the body that would make you continue to live and not just
Correct.
fall down. But then at the same time, you were getting spiritual type experiences or messages that were kind of, hey, you got coming from kind of both sides. So it kind of keeps you kind of, and I think that helps people because it allows you to keep moving on. Like sometimes you wonder yourself how people even do move on when there's a
Yeah.
loss like that because you think, how do we get through it? So,
Yeah, and I think just even letting go of the expectation that we have to move on, like
right,
that.
right.
I mean, one big trigger for me was like if I would listen to things and I literally would just take it and segment it out. Like if I was listening to affirmations or a podcast or whatever it was, or a book, and they said the words "let it go," like that, just I struggled with that because it's like, well, I don't want to let go. Like I don't want to let go of our memories. I don't want to let go of our experiences. But for me, it was like shifting the language. I don't
Mhm.
even use the word death or died anymore. Like I've shifted my language around that because our soul and our spirit does not die. It's eternal. So shifting the way that you talk to yourself, even, even if you like, obviously you're going to hear certain things from certain people in society, but just shifting the language you use with yourself, I think can make a big difference. So for me, it was like, okay, well, I'm not letting go of like my lived experiences or the things that are happening for me now, but I can start to think about transforming and moving through the dark grief. And
Right.
so it's that shift in like language that you use with yourself.
Well, it's interesting because when you're saying that, I was thinking to myself, you're right, because if we're saying, let's, you got to move on kind of thing, well, eventually you're going to move into the same space that your husband is in. We all are. I said on
Right.
a recent podcast that I saw this picture and it showed us all lined up in a field. It showed all these people and then it showed people going up into this light. And then it said something around the lines of, we're all in the same line. We just don't know how far back we are, kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
meaning we're all going to the same place. So, you're not really technically moving on because you're still going to be together and you still are together, especially if it's just that energy form changes, right? So
Right.
so I completely understand that. When I talk to people who've had experiences, near death experiences, spiritual transformative experiences, things like that, there are a lot of people that, are coming to me that share their experience, and these experiences happened 20, 30, 40 years ago at sometimes. And one of the questions I'll always say is, why did you wait till now to start sharing it? And, sometimes this was very personal. This was a very personal thing. I didn't want to tell people because they thought I was crazy, or all these different, like, these things start to come up. I'm curious, you said that you were having like this experience with your husband there, and because you both kind of got the idea that you don't die. I'm wondering if there's any experiences that you feel comfortable sharing that you'd want to share that you both had. So how did those messages come through? Like, was there anything in detail that you had that was just kind of like it just really made you think, oh no, this is for sure. There's no question in my mind at this point.
Yeah. Well, can I come back to that? Because I feel like there's something I need to say from what you just asked.
Sure,
You
absolutely.
just asked it. So I do have to say that I immediately felt called. I knew I was going to be sharing this. I knew I was going to be like, I would say within the first like year and a half of his passing, I knew I was going to be writing a book about these experiences. I knew that my purpose was tied to this. That was my why. That was the why of why I was going through such deep pain,
Mm,
was to shine a light for other people on these experiences, and that it's okay to talk about these experiences. Matter of fact, it's very important that we do talk about these experiences. And I can't tell you how many people have privately thanked me because I'm so vocal about my lived experiences with this, because they've had things over, how many ever years, like you just said, 5, 10, 20 years, and they've never talked to anybody about it. And it's a connection between us all. I mean, it really is like it's the connective tissue between our souls and our spirits, like to be talking about these things. So I just have to say, like, it deeply connects to my why. And that's why I was like so vocal out of the gate about it. So
mm.
I felt like I was supposed to say that. Maybe
No,
there's somebody that needs to hear that.
no, I'm glad
But
you did because you're right. I feel like before you answer the other question, I was going to say I feel we've kind of lost our, we all celebrate births. We go up and we line up and we wait in the waiting rooms to find out a friend or a family member who's having a baby, and we get all excited. Oh, they're here, and then they go home, and then life moves on. And yet we don't celebrate deaths. And now me just saying that might trigger some people. But what do you mean celebrate deaths? It's death. But where did that happen? Where in our existence did that happen? Because if you look at the history of humankind, there were civilizations that celebrated it.
oh, I know.
And somewhere we've lost that. And it's hard for us to actually understand why we would celebrate it, because I think we've lost some kind of faith in what comes next. I don't know where
Yeah,
that
and
happened, but
I
yeah.
think a lot of that, I think that actually ties back to our lack of connection with nature too, because it's the cycle of rebirth, reincarnation. I mean, if you look historically at like so many different cultures and the celebration, like you just said, of somebody's passing, it frequently ties back to like the idea of rebirth and reincarnation. And it ties back to the cycle of nature. And I think that the further away from, the more we get tied into material things, the further away we get from that connection back to nature, which is truly God and source, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it all does the same thing. Everybody loves fall, for instance, autumn. Everybody
Exactly.
loves it. Do they realize that's like our end of life?
Yeah.
Like if you
Yeah.
tie it to humankind, like you fall, what comes after fall? Winter. Everything's dead.
Right.
The leaves fall, they're dead.
Right.
Yet if you look at our society, when we get into our 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, it's like we're looked down up, not down upon, but we're not treated in the same
Like not
way.
as viable. Yeah.
Right. And it's just
Right.
that's always fascinated me too, because I'm like, I think in our innate nature is to enjoy, like we love fall for a reason. We love autumn
Yeah.
for a reason. Why is that?
Yeah.
I haven't not met many people who are like, I hate fall. Like I haven't, I just
Yeah.
haven't. I haven't found many
Yeah.
people. It's
Yeah.
usually they don't like winter a lot of
Yeah.
the times, or they don't like spring can be kind of mushy and stuff. Well,
Right.
being a little baby kind of sucks at times, and probably not being here is, I guess, something we don't know of. But I'm just saying, fall is at the end, and so nature, it does all apply. So I totally agree with that.
Right.
Um, but yeah, so getting back to that, any moments you've had or anything that's been,
Yeah, I'll
yeah,
tell you. So I've had so many, but I'll tell you two that were just like mind blowing that happened to me early on. Um, so I'm sure from the conversations you've had with other people, you have come across the idea of like the other side is very, very high vibrational, and we have like a lower density energy, right? So
absolutely.
typically we need to try to raise our vibration to meet them kind of in the middle to have like experiences. But they can, if we're in like a very deep dark place, especially with grief, it's a lot of energetic work for them, but they can come down and help us. And there was an evening that I was like really, really struggling. Both of the stories I'm going to tell you, I was very much struggling because it was within the first year, really early days. I'd say within the first like 2 months of Roger passing. Um, I was laying in bed. I had just actually finished a session. I felt very called and had all this stuff coming across my way to do Akashic record work, especially related to my healing. And so, of my heart that was very broken. But I had just finished a session, which was basically like a semi-meditative visualization. And had like, it was over and I was just laying there. I was very relaxed. And so not crying, which at the time was like a big accomplishment to like just not be crying at any given moment. And I looked over and my husband was physically present. Like I literally could see him laying next to me. And he told me he loved me. It lasted just a couple seconds. But it was beyond real. It was like, in some ways, I would say even more real than you and I have in this conversation right now. I
Mhm.
felt it in every cell of my being, and I knew what he had done to come and help me. I knew what he had done to do that for me. Um, so that's one.
Mhm.
And
Can I
you can I'm
before you
getting
tell
very
me?
emotional because it
Yeah,
was so,
absolutely. I can feel it. I can feel it as an empath. I can feel that too. I was gonna say, I just want to just say this. I just had an episode come out. It was 2 episodes before I guess it would have been two back. And same thing. It was a woman who had lost her mother, and she was on at her bed, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, her mother's sitting at the foot of her bed in a physical form, physical. And she was like, "Oh my God, mom, like, what are you doing here?" kind of thing. And she said, "Listen, I'm okay. I need you to know I'm okay." It was that kind of thing. And then, but then she explained, she said she disappeared, but she could still hear her mother. And she said, "Why did you leave? Where did you go?" And she said, "It takes so much work to get the energy down to do this, but I did it for you," kind of. It was like this. I had to work really hard to do this, but here I am. But I'm going back. I can't maintain it because your energy is
right,
so, the vibration is so low and the
right,
vibration is so fast there. The way you
right.
just said it is the exact same thing. I can't make this stuff up. This was
Yeah.
2 episodes ago. By the time this comes out, it'll probably be 4 or 5 episodes back for anyone listening. But uh, Yeah, that's fascinating that he actually showed up. Did he look the same way? Like, did
Oh
he look
yeah.
physically real, like with skin
Yeah.
and everything looked the
Yeah.
same?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. And I guess somewhere in my body, I knew it was going to be brief. So I wasn't surprised when, when he was gone. But like,
Hmm.
I knew that was him like putting out a hand to me, like that it's going to be okay, you know?
Did it
Uh,
shift or did it, were you already in high belief at that point? Or did that really just take it to the next level? Like,
yeah, I was already in high belief. It blew my mind. To me, having those experiences ties back to my felt knowingness of responsibility to stay here and be here.
mhm,
Because if he is making that effort to make me be okay, to
mhm.
help me experience joy again, to help me put one foot in front of the other, who am I to decide otherwise? That means I've got big responsibility here to me.
So it made it more serious. Like, hey, I gotta get myself up on my
Yeah.
feet and get going now because like that was a big thing. And for anyone out there that would say to you, oh, maybe you were just going through grief and you were making this story up in your mind and you just kind of seen it, that doesn't resonate at all.
Not at all.
Okay,
Not at all.
right. Okay, I just I
Making up experiences doesn't like light your skin up. Like, I mean, it just,
right.
yeah. I mean, when you like, and it's, I'm sure you have the conversation with people with NDEs all the time. Like, some of this is even hard to put in human words because
Hmm.
our language isn't honestly beautiful enough to be able to communicate the things that happen when you're having these experiences. And
Right.
it's felt sense in your body. It's just this deep knowingness that goes so beyond our like humanness.
Hmm. I think one of the hard things I have is when I have people who, because a lot of people know the work I do. A lot of people are starting to kind of even find out more and more, and they will say things to me. And they'll say, well, why don't I get to see this? Why don't I get to experience these things? Why is it, when the skeptic side? And I really like to bring that side up because I don't like to look down on like a skeptic side of things. I like to kind of weigh both sides. I think that's why I'm kind of good at what I'm doing because I'm always looking at the whole picture. I'm not
Right,
just this biased in this one way. I'm trying to really almost like a researcher would. So I'm trying to
right,
really determine what's going on. And the only thing I can come up with that answer is that how do you know you're supposed to? Maybe part of the journey they're supposed to have is to not know
right,
that so they can, it's
right,
kind of like we're here to try to find our light, right? So like
right.
it's not necessarily needed for everybody. And sometimes it is. And maybe in that one instance you needed that so that you didn't just keep going downhill. Like there might have been some kind of universal knowledge that she
Yeah.
needs to see that I'm
I
okay. And
100% believe
yeah,
that.
yeah. So he was there for a moment and then he was gone. And then what was the other experience that you had?
The other one happened in November, so it was like not even a month after he passed. And I was outside and we didn't have like statues or anything like that in our yard. I was outside, but we have dogs, and I was outside doing something in the yard. I was really low. Like I had been crying all day. It was a Sunday. I had been crying off and on all day. Like I said, it hadn't even been a month. And I told you frogs are one of his signs. He loved frogs, and I had a conversation with his son the day that he passed, actually, about frogs. And I come around the corner to go into the door of the house, and there was a concrete frog, like just sitting there next to like the edge of like the mulch that had never been there before. And
Wow.
not only was it like this concrete frog, but it also had my husband had like a very I would say like cheekiness with me, like kind of a flirty type of energy always with me.
Hmm.
And this frog has like a very cheeky expression on its
Oh,
face.
really?
Like not only did this concrete frog like manifest out of nowhere, but it also like the expression very much represented him. So
Wow.
yeah, it was mind blowing.
And it was in your yard
Yeah,
or is in your, and you don't
yeah.
know how it got there.
Nope,
Wow. You still
nope.
have this? You
Of
still,
course. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
For a
incredible.
while I kept it like outside the front door because I just thought it was so like amazing. But then I'm like, oh, I got to bring this inside. I have to protect this.
Yeah, and he would have told you if he would have got that before his passing, right? I mean, he would have
Oh yeah,
let
no,
you
I
know.
would have, and it didn't exist. I mean, I would have seen it.
So this was
Yeah,
a physical thing that actually formed
physical
or
thing.
showed up somehow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. It's kind of like those, because I was thinking to myself, how does something physically form like that or show up? And again, I've been studying near-death experiences since I was a kid, and there's been so many times where someone say gets in a car accident, and this older woman or older man or woman just shows up, pulls them out of the car, says,
Yeah.
ambulance will be here. And then the ambulance shows up and the person's gone. Well, anyone
Yeah.
in their right mind wouldn't just leave the scene. Like if you called an
Right.
ambulance, you wouldn't just be like, "Hey, I did my duty. I'm out. Maybe they'll die, maybe they
Yeah.
won't." And those people, who are those people? Those physical people that are there. And you hear about this
Yeah.
all the time.
Oh,
So
I know.
same kind of thing. It's a physical
My husband
manifestation.
had a similar experience when he was in his 20s. He was driving his very tiny convertible car down a country road going like 80 mile an hour. And there was like a huge, like, I don't know, like a Cutlass or Plymouth, like old school, like 70s sedan that pulled out at the exact wrong moment um, and should have T-boned him. And there was a semi coming the other direction, and the semi stopped, seeing my husband's car do like a 360, but the car's never touched. Like
Wow.
there was
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
reason. He should have been killed that day, but
Hmm.
it wasn't his day. It wasn't his day.
And you talk about technology, we're at a point too where there's like TikTok and Instagram and all these reels that come up. And sometimes I'll see like a kid running across the road, just a transport truck will run them over, and then they'll just be sitting there like, oh, I'm okay. Like
Yeah.
that kid was not supposed to
Yeah.
go because you
Yeah.
put,
Well, look at Jeremy Renner. I
right.
mean,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, there's so much evidence that when it's not our time, it's not our time.
Just today, I was driving this morning, and there was a car passing me, and a squirrel ran right out in front of me. Instinctually, I don't want to kill animals. I'm like,
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
don't
running over
either.
this squirrel. My brain just went, nope. And I said, go back. Like I said to the squirrel, this sounds crazy, but I said, go back. He came right out. I said, go back. He went right back. And I had already started going into the car that was passing me. We probably came within a couple inches, and I came back and I was shook up. And I remember thinking to myself, I always hear these exit point moments, right? Like I'm like, okay, maybe I just dodged something there because I don't know what that was, but it was because those things happen so fast.
Yeah.
And we're always told drive safe. Well, I was driving pretty safe. It
Yeah.
just the moment happened and it was like, okay, and here I am to still speak with you. So that's good. So like
Yeah.
I'm more aware of these moments when they come up now because I go,
Yeah.
that was close. I'm curious about something. When we first started talking, when I first looked you up when we started this episode today, finding out that you're now doing Reiki healing, you're coaching, all these different things that you did. How long did it take from the time that your husband had passed that you started really working in this work? I'm just curious when you started doing that and how you went about it, if you wouldn't mind answering that.
Yeah, it was very gradual. So the first thing I was journaling when he was in hospice of all the experiences and conversations we were having. So as soon as I started like, getting the signs and everything, I just kept journaling. And so that led to me starting to write my book, which was kind of like the first step to doing this work to help other people in grief. And then I got called to different modalities. So I got called to train in somatic therapy. I got called to do intuitive Reiki, which is basically kind of like mediumship layered into Reiki healing. And the two things actually layer really, really well together. So it was very gradual, and honestly, I just kept following the nuggets. Like if something kept coming up for me, like the idea of writing a book like kept coming up. I mean, I had so many people like that would tell me like you're going to write a book, you need to write a book, like you know like every like mediums, like people I in my life, it was popping up for me in like dreams and things. It just was bam 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 bam, like you with the 1111, like it just over and over and over and over and over
Yeah.
again. And so that was kind of the first foundational step. I knew there was going to be more than that. just instinctively. And then it just kind of gradually kept coming. And anytime I would get called to explore a modality, I would like trust the nudge.
Right. Absolutely. I love how you're saying it like that because this is something that we have to start doing is listening to the messages that are coming through. The other thing that, actually, I'll get the name of the book from you in a moment so I can let the listeners know the name of the book. But one thing that drives me a little bit crazy is sometimes I do some episodes and some of the people I speak with, the guests, they'll be like, "Oh, I wrote this book." And people are like, "Oh, they wrote a book. That's why they're doing this." And they go right to this negative place. And I'm like, that's how you share your wisdom. That's the whole point. It's the same thing I look at. Like, this is my book. Soul Inspired is my book. This is a
Yeah.
podcast, but it's each chapter is an episode. It's
Oh, I love
how,
that.
right? It's how we share. It's just I'm doing it in audio, and this is just how it works, right? But a book is the same. It's just a different concept of sharing your insights, your life experiences to help somebody. That's the ripple
Yeah.
effect we're creating. So I don't try to get caught up in the negative, but it sometimes I go, I don't know why we come from that place, but that's part of being a human being, I guess, right? So
Yeah.
what is the name of the book?
The enduring and everlasting.
The Enduring and Everlasting.
Yeah, and it actually is kind of a little bit of a guide. So the first section of it is telling our stories from the physical world. The second section of it is talking about the signs and messages that I started getting after he passed, and then which very much tie to the experiences we had in the physical world. And then the third section is a bit of a how-to guide to build these connections yourself.
Oh wow. So it's interactive in a way.
Totally.
Yeah, I love those. It's almost like when we're kids, we have those activity books. It makes things a little bit more exciting to,
Yeah.
to go through.
Yeah.
I'm the type I like to read, but I have trouble sitting and going through an entire book. I get kind of lost because I'm a musician. I'm more audible.
Yeah.
So I need some kind of creativity or activity to kind of keep my brain kind of moving in the right direction. So
Yeah.
whereas I know some people that are like they can just sit there and read book after book after book. We're all different, but for me that never really worked. So I like how you've done it that way. The Enduring and Everlasting. And is that on like Amazon
Amazon,
and
Barnes and Noble, any place you buy it. Yeah.
nice. That's great. So you did the book, you started getting into meditative therapy. I think you said therapy, somatic, is it called somatic therapy?
Panic therapy.
And now you coach, right? Where do people find your, like, how do they get in contact with you if they're interested in working with you, or is that
Yeah,
easy to
absolutely.
come
So
across?
through thesoulrevival.com or I am super, super active on Instagram. So I go live a lot. I have guests a lot on Instagram, but I talk about the work that I do and the help with clients on Instagram. And my Instagram handle is at the Healing Grief Guide.
One of the last questions I always ask everybody, and I just really, you've had some experiences now, and I don't, again, you had some beliefs before, but they were the way they were. You didn't have anything that really pushed you over the edge, and here you are now. I always ask everyone if you can really come up with any answer for this. Why do you believe that you and I, human beings, come here and incarnate on the earth? What's our purpose to being here?
I really do think, well, I think it's twofold. I think it's to help rise the collective consciousness. And I do believe, like, I very much believe in the work that, as I mentioned earlier, that Gary Zukav is doing around like rising the collective. And I think that we were called here specifically, those of us who are doing this work were called here specifically during this time of quite a bit of turmoil to help raise the collective. And I think personally, to have so much experience, negative and positive, that helps us learn, helps our soul grow.
Mm.
I do in a lot of ways believe this is a school.
Yeah, I get that a lot. A lot of people say it. It's the easiest way we can say it in human in English, the English
Yeah,
language,
like
right?
we
It's like
talked about earlier, we're restricted with human language 100%.
right, because school almost seems like small in comparison to what we're doing,
Yes.
but it is a learning place, and it can be a tough place, but it can be a beautiful place too. I've always tried to keep the positive with it too. All right.
Yes.
Well, thanks so much for being on today. I really appreciate you taking the time. I generally turn to the audience and say, please continue to like, share, and subscribe so that the Soul Inspired can keep getting listened to and it can help people. A story like today will definitely help somebody. I encourage everybody to check out the book, The Enduring and Everlasting, and to check out Lindsay Stanton's work. But I appreciate you being here today on Soul Inspired.
Thank you so much for having me.
So